Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this McGraw-Hill Masterclass webinar. Today we're talking about the road to leadership with Dr. Carol Huston, and this is of course presented in partnership with Sigma Theta Tau. So thank you for making time for us today. A couple things to note. Let me adjust my speaker here. First things first, we have this provider disclosure statement that I'll read. So Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing is an accredited provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurse Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. And this activity today is eligible for 1 contact hour. So to receive those contact hours, please be in attendance throughout the entire webinar or webinar recording and complete this evaluation form. So the link to the form is available on this slide. And you should also be seeing it in the chat if you're joining us live. I'll just read the end part to check that box. No one with the ability to control content has any relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies. There we go. All right, so please do that evaluation form if you would like the contact hour for this session today. All right, just a couple of other things. Again, this session is being recorded. The chat box is open. There will be time for Q&A with Dr. Huston at the end of the session today. My name is Kaylin Creason. I'll be monitoring that chat. I'm with McGraw-Hill, so if you have any technical issues or anything like that, please let me know as well. I can also assure you are all muted, so please feel free to eat your lunch or whatever you might be doing right now. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Darren Lowe from, sorry if I gave you a promotion there,
Okay.
Darren Lowe from Sigma to walk us through a little bit about Sigma.
Thank you, Kaylin. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon what part of the world that you're from. Thank you for joining Sigma and McGraw-Hill in this Masterclass webinar. And thank you, Dr. Huston, for agreeing to be our presenter. So just a couple of slides on information about Sigma. Kaylin, if you can advance the slides for me. Just a little bit about Sigma. Sigma is a institution that's been around. It was founded in 1922 by 6 nurses from Indiana University. We're one of the largest nursing organizations in the world. Membership is by invitation or by application based upon academic merit through all levels of nursing programs, undergraduate through terminal degree. And we are an accredited provider of NCPD and we publish award-winning books. Next slide. Just wanted to talk about our mission and our vision. Our vision is we want to have connected, empowered nurse leaders transforming global healthcare. And our mission is to develop nurse leaders anywhere to improve healthcare everywhere. Continuing on with our why, Sigma's global value statement is that we are an international community of nurses dedicated to the advancement of knowledge, teaching, learning, and service through cultivation of communities of practice, education, and research. And you can see the watermark that we have presence throughout the world globally. We're dedicated to wellness and actively engage with nurses throughout the world. We do foster that global development. We embrace innovation, and we consider local, regional, and the global impact of all of our decisions. Next slide. We serve, these are all the nurses and the levels of nurses that we serve, from clinical all the way to administrators and researchers, entrepreneurs. And again, it's at all levels of degree and with that global impact. And then the remaining few slides just talk about what makes us different and our value proposition on becoming a member of Sigma or participating in our programs and our publications. The professional development, we are a global network. We have over 100,000 nurse leaders in over 100 countries and over 600 chapters. Next slide. Scholarship and research, we're dedicated to promoting nursing scholarship and research. We offer grants and awards to support that research. Leadership innovation, we empower nurses to lead and innovate in healthcare, and we provide platforms for nurses to influence healthcare policy. Next slide. And finally, that recognition and honor. Membership in Sigma is a prestigious recognition of the nurses' academic and professional achievements. And we also foster a supportive community where nurses can share their experiences, seek advice, and find mentorship opportunities. And so, with that, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Carol Huston. Dr. Carol Huston is a professor emerita from the School of Nursing at California State University, Chico. She has taught there from 1982 through 2019, and she assumed the position of director of the school from 2010 to 2015. Dr. Huston continues to work as a leadership consultant in workforce planning, leadership succession, plan change, organizational restructuring, team building, and conflict resolution. Dr. Huston has published 7 books on leadership management, as well as more than 150 articles in leading professional journals. She has published 2 books with Sigma Theta Ta, The Road to Leadership and The Road to Positive Work Cultures. And those were published in 2018 and 2020, respectively. And she's also published a children's book, When Little Girls Dream, which was published in 2019. Dr. Huston is a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, and she served as the 2007-2009 president of Sigma Theta Ta International Honor Society of Nursing. And in addition, she has led interprofessional healthcare delegations around the world. So I'd like everyone to welcome Dr. Huston as she presents The Road to Leadership. Thank you, Dr. Huston.
Thank you, Doreen. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm hoping you can see my slides. Yes. Oh, great. Good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you live. Thank you for such a nice introduction. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you today. And a big thank you to both Sigma and McGraw-Hill for inviting me to spend this time with you. So today I have the opportunity to talk a little bit about what leadership is, and also to share my personal belief that leadership really is a journey, not a destination. And that's because the road to becoming a leader can sometimes be a little bit bumpy, and we don't talk about that often enough. So I also want to clarify up front that when I talk about leaders, I'm talking really about all nurses, because I do believe that each and every nurse can and should be a leader, and that in fact leadership is a 21st century competency for all nurses. Sometimes when I think about the leadership skills that nurses are expected to have right off, it can be pretty overwhelming. And indeed, as I have traveled the world, one of the most constant things I have ever heard is from nurses is that many of them believe that the leadership skills they have are inadequate for the jobs they already hold. Sometimes it's because they didn't have any formal leadership training or management training. Other times they've had that training, but they didn't really pay much attention to that class in school because they didn't think it pertained to them, or they didn't realize how quickly they were going to be asked to step into one of those positions. Also, I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes leaders are set up to fail. The workload that they're given is just unreasonable for any one person. Now, my guess is that most of the nurses that I've met probably have far better leadership skills than they give themselves credit for. But I also think that in many cases, they had to learn these skills by trial and error. And when we're talking about human lives, sometimes that trial and error kind of processing can be very dangerous. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what leadership means, how it means different things in different situations and with different people. I'm also going to share some of the lessons I've learned along my own personal leadership journey. So I have 3 goals for all of you today. The first is I'd like you to have a little bit of fun. I've included, I hope, some slides that you'll think are funny. I'd also like to see you reflect a little on your personal leadership strengths and weaknesses. And finally, that you leave here with at least one new goal for your own personal leadership development. And I will try to save enough time for us to answer a few questions at the very end. So let's get started by looking at the definition of leadership. And I'm not going to give you a textbook definition. I just want you to realize that leaders are those people who are out front. They are leading the charge. They're trying to make changes. They're trying to make a difference. So it involves a lot of risk taking and challenging the status quo because you're trying to make a difference or to make things better. So let's just start by looking at the definition of leadership. There are a lot of definitions out there, but I think the most important thing to remember is that leaders are those individuals who are out front. They're taking chances. They're taking risk. They're doing whatever they need to do to try to make a difference in the status quo. But leadership and management are not the same. If you're a manager, you have a certain amount of authority or power over others just by virtue of your position. In other words, people have to follow you because you're their manager. But in leadership, followers follow leaders by choice. So all it takes to stop being a leader is to have your followers choose to stop following you. I think that Stephen Covey makes this distinction best when he says that management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success, but leadership is determining whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. So are leaders born or are they made? And if you're not what you might consider a natural born leader, do you have the possibility to become a leader? Well, we know that some of the earliest leadership theorists really did believe that people were born to be leaders or not. And they call these the great man trait theories. But more contemporary leadership theorists really do believe that there's at least some choice in the decision to become a leader. Now, I'm not saying that it's not easier for some people to lead, or that some people don't have certain personality characteristics or traits that might make it easier for them to lead. In fact, some people at very young ages, they're more fearless, they're more willing to take risk, they're more curious. But not all leaders have to be gregarious by nature. I think some of the most effective leaders I know are quiet leaders. They've come forth when nobody else was willing to come forward and take the risk. So what's the best advice I can give you on your own personal leadership journey to try to avoid some of those mistakes that I've made? Well, today I'm going to share 9 leadership lessons, and many of them will detail mistakes that I made and things that I had to learn the hard way. The first lesson is directed primarily at those of you who are just beginning your leadership journey. So I'm so glad that we have some students here on the call. And that's to find a mentor and positive role models to share your journey. Mentoring is an intense, positive, one-on-one experience where a more experienced individual agrees to take a less experienced individual under their wing. Now, in the past, mentors typically were older than their mentees, but that's not the case so much anymore, particularly in nursing. But it's just important to remember that the mentor is there to protect, to guide the mentee, and to help them be successful in their new role. Because we know that many new nurses need some time to learn the complexities of the professional role. And having the protection of a mentor is absolutely critical to career success. Now, nursing has earned a reputation for not always being as kind to its young as it should. So having a mentor who can show you the ropes or tell you about those hidden organizational taboos, share with you who has formal power, informal power, and just helping you get off to that right first step when you first get started, it's really important to being successful early on. But it's not just new workers or new nurses who need to have mentors. Sometimes even experienced workers need to have mentors. And that's particularly true if a person has made a job change or some kind of a horizontal move within the organization. And I think the best example I can give you of that comes from my own experience where I transitioned from being a middle-level manager in an acute care hospital into the academic setting. I had made an assumption that my expertise would continue to be valued because certainly I felt very comfortable and confident in my role as a middle-level manager at the hospital. So I have very vivid memories of my very first faculty meeting. And the topic for discussion was pass-fail grading, and I absolutely had no factual information about it whatsoever. But I did feel like it might be important for me to step in and offer my highly valued opinion, which I promptly did. Now, I no longer remember what that opinion was, but I do remember after I shared it, everyone in the room stopped speaking, and they all turned to look at one of the most senior nursing professors there. She cleared her voice, her throat, and then she promptly said, "Well, Carol, perhaps after you've been here for a while, your opinion will matter more." Now, I was pretty speechless, and I'm sure some of you think that this was probably rude and these should never be tolerated in the workplace. But the reality is that I was a newcomer to the organization, and I hadn't yet paid my dues into understanding the bigger issues of academia, which are very different from the clinical arena. When you're new to an organization, you're going to have to work harder and be more flexible and build a support system for yourself. When I look back at that first meeting, think of how helpful it would have been to have a mentor there to help me understand the politics of the new organization and who the key players were. And I also think that person would have reminded me about paying my dues before having a mentor, if that mentor is honest to say, but everything that as a new faculty person, and she was always honest with me. It wasn't always easy to hear what she had. She told me a better teacher and a strong is not always grit. And Bessie also suggested early on different things that I might accomplish once I had completed my doctorate. Now, the first time Bessie suggested that to me, I looked at her in utter amazement because I thought I had just finished my thesis, which I was still paying for. I had small children at home. I had a husband who wanted more of my time, not less. But, you know, it's kind of funny. Once she planted that thought, I did start thinking about going back to school, and it did become a reality. And indeed, everything that Bessie suggested might be true for me in terms of opportunities did come true as a result of completing that higher education. And then finally, at least 25 years ago, Bessie casually said to me one day, "Well, I know that Sigma Theta Tau International is your organization of choice. You ought to think about someday running for president." And again, I was floored. I looked at her and said, "Oh my gosh, Bessie, I'm still afraid of speaking publicly. I just can't imagine ever having those kind of opportunities." But with her coaching and her encouragement, I continued to become more and more involved in the organization. And approximately 10 years after she first suggested it to me, I did go on and become the 2007 to 2009 president of Sigma, which was a life-changing experience for me. I often wonder if I would have in my life what I have without Bessie. I'm not saying in the end it didn't take a long. Having her is, I think, are not the same. Positives are really important. Mentors are different in that mentors do the nurturing and it's a long-term relationship. Bullying is really passive. An individual just looks at you and thinks they would like to be more like you. But positive role models and negative role models are contagious. So if you primarily hang around with disgruntled, unhappy, whiny people, it's more likely that that's the attitude and behavior that you will adopt. But there are so many positive, wonderful role models out there. You just have to look for them. I think the best example I can give you of positive role models having an impact on me was at one of my very first Sigma conventions. I got there late. And when you get there late, you have to sit wherever there's a seat left. And there happened to be a seat at the front of the room. When I sat down, everybody began introducing themselves to me. And they were names like Lucy Kelly, Amy King, Sister Rosemary Donnelly, and Virginia Henderson. I was overwhelmed. I just wanted to sit down in my seat and kind of shrink, because these were all people I had studied in school or heard about. They were theories, not warm-blooded human people. But the most amazing thing happened in that luncheon. Not only did they just warmly welcome me to the table, they wanted to know my aspirations. They began coaching and networking with me. And I've often thought about this luncheon because it really impacted how I think about leadership, because it made me realize that being a national or international nursing leader isn't about being a distant theoretical icon. It's about being real and accessible to those who follow you. Networking is also an important part of becoming a leader. Unfortunately, most of us tend to network and seek out friendships with clones of ourselves. And this really limits your ability to experience the richness that you find in diversity. All right, leadership lesson 2. It's the importance of being self-aware and authentic. We talk about that all the time, but it is really much harder to do in real life. In fact, one of the newer leadership theories is authentic leadership. And authentic leadership says in order to lead, you have to be self-aware about your values, and then the actions you take have to be in accordance with those values. Sometimes, though, it's very hard to be authentic because it takes a lot of courage to be true to your convictions when you have a lot of outside forces encouraging you to do something that might be morally inappropriate. For example, you just have to turn on the news and we'll see examples of non-authentic leaders. For example, political or religious figures who preach morality and then are found to be involved in a sex scandal or some kind of illegal drug scandal. I often wonder when I hear these stories whether these leaders simply weren't in touch with their values or whether they chose to act not in accordance with their values. In some ways, it doesn't matter. The end result is the same. You're going to lose your followers when you aren't authentic. So that importance of being self-aware just can't be understated. But sometimes our values are so ingrained, we don't even realize that they're impacting our decisions. And sometimes too, even if we're not self-aware, we don't know what our desired goal is. And then when we achieve it, we don't even recognize it. All right, lesson number 3. Lighten up a little. Enjoy life more. And don't always take life quite so seriously. In other words, be able to laugh at yourself and leave your ego at home in a jar. I'm not saying that we shouldn't toot our horn when we do something significant, but sometimes we take ourselves far too seriously. We certainly take ourselves more seriously than anyone else does. So this ability to laugh at yourself and not take yourself too seriously is really an underrated leadership skill, because we are all human and we all make mistakes, and being embarrassed by the dumb things we do, it's a universal experience. And for the most part, our mistakes are recoverable. Now, this is a fake photo. Don't worry, no dog was injured in creating these slides. Just remember that most mistakes we make are recoverable. For example, what's one of the dumbest things I've ever done? Well, it's probably been a decade ago now. We were having a local research conference as part of our Sigma chapter. And at the last minute the night before, I added the slide because I was talking about leadership and risk-taking. At least this is the slide that I thought that I was adding. Little did I know that on my little computer screen at home, I couldn't see several little profane words coming out of that Chihuahua's mouth. It wasn't until I put them up on the big Trinitron screen at the conference that they became apparent. So I learned a lot about double checking my slides before I do a presentation, but I think I have never been more embarrassed in my professional life. Yet, I think the most important lesson that I learned from all of this is that it's okay to be fallible. I couldn't apologize enough to the audience, but your followers will forgive you. And the secret is just to acknowledge your fallibilities and move on. In other words, make peace with your past, so it won't screw up your present. Another part of giving up some ego is realizing that we likely never have as much control over our lives as we would like to think to. In fact, I often remind myself that control is only an illusion. There are so many things in our lives that could change just in the blink of an eye. In addition, we tend to focus on the problems in our lives and assume that everyone else has things easier for them. So try not to compare your life to others. You have no idea what their journey is all about, because all of us face challenges. And if we threw all of our problems in a pile, more than likely, you'd want to take your own back. So appreciate the good times and just try to hang in there when things are really tough. And finally, it's okay to let your pretenses down a while and to be human. I think women in particular are at greater risk of this need for perfection, to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect teacher. And anytime we seek perfection in one role, we have to recognize that there's got to be some give in some of the other roles. So do give yourself permission to be less than perfect. We are our own worst critics. And I look back now at some of the opportunities I've given up in my life that I turned down because I worried about how I looked or what I had to wear or what others might think, and I'm disappointed. The fourth lesson, be visionary, take risk, and ask for permission only when absolutely necessary. Risk-taking is an important part of leadership, but there is tremendous difference in all of our willingness to take risk. Most people can cope with risk, even if it's a little bit scary. But some of you really are risk adverse. And then there are a couple of you, I bet, that really love the thrill of being out there on the edge and taking risk. And that's important. But there are risk, and then there are risk. The risk itself shouldn't be the thrill. It should be whatever you hope to be able to accomplish as a result of taking that risk. So risk-taking that's more likely than not to result in professional harm is rarely wise. But not taking any risk is worse than taking too many, because conformity is the opposite of leadership, because no one is willing to step out front and take those risks. That's probably why thought leadership has emerged as one of the newest leadership theories in the 21st century. A thought leader is a person who is recognized among his or her peers for innovative thinking and risk-taking. So we know that thought leaders can help us to avoid groupthink. Sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day struggles of just getting our work done that we forget to ask whether there might be a better or different way of doing things. And just because we've done things the same way since time began doesn't mean that there might be a better or another way to do something. And finally, this lesson talked about asking for permission only when absolutely necessary. There are so many wonderful programs and initiatives out there that exist only because somebody didn't ask for permission. Now, moving ahead without permission does carry professional risk, so you do have to be very judicious about it. But, and hear me when I say this, do not ask for permission if no is not an option. And let me repeat that. It's just so important. Do not ask for permission if no is not an option. The fifth leadership lesson is about personal power. And it suggests that having gas in the tank and money in the bank will help you to be maneuverable, which is automatically a source of personal power. So I often shared a story with my students about personal power. It was a lesson I, again, had to learn the hard way, my little bump on my road to leadership. I was a relatively new nurse working in a critical care unit, and earning a paycheck for one of the first times in a long time. Couldn't wait to put school behind me and make some money and buy a home and get a car. And within a few years, my husband went back to school, and I was the primary breadwinner, and we were kind of living the great American life, mortgaged up to the hilt, but beginning to enjoy, an adult life. And I shared all of these great things with all of my coworkers. And after about a year, the supervisor came onto the unit one day and shared that one of the employees who worked rotating shifts, every 4 weeks she would shift from day shift to evening shift to night shift, that she was going to be going on a medical leave for a year, and that somebody was going to have to take on her rotating shifts. She asked for volunteers, and no one volunteered. So she asked me, and I said, no, I just really liked the shift that I was on, didn't want to do it. So she came back the next day and she said, well, Carol, you're going to have to take those rotating shifts. And I said, but I don't want to. And she said, I know. And I said, but there are other people here who are newer than me. She said, yeah, I know. I talked to them and they said they'd quit if I made them do it. And I said, okay, well, I might quit. She said, but Carol, you can't. Your husband's in school. You have a mortgage. You have a car payment. The problem is she was right. It was a valuable lesson for me. The place that I was working really was the only game in town for having an acute care hospital job in the unit that I wanted. And I had shared far too much information about my personal life and circumstances, and it made me much more vulnerable. So be very careful about the amount of personal information you share, particularly if it gives somebody power over you. Lesson 6, choose your battles carefully. That means you have to recognize power as an asset and learn how to use it wisely, because the only way you can really make a difference in other people's lives, you have to have a certain amount of power to control resources and to make those kinds of things happen. But there are a lot of people out there who misunderstand power, and I think particularly women, because some women have been socialized to view power as something negative. And that's often very different with men. But I can tell you that I have been both powerful and powerless in my life, and I have a preference. In fact, I think almost all of us have a preference. Being powerful is infinitely preferable because everybody needs to feel like they have some control over the things in their life. In fact, I also disagree with that adage about power corrupting. I think that powerlessness is much more apt to corrupt someone. That's because if you don't have any real power, you tend to be bossy, rules-minded, dictatorial, because you're just so desperate to have control over someone. And when I stop and I think about the most powerful people I know in my life, they don't need to have visible shows of power. You just know that they're powerful. So power in and of itself is neither good or bad. It's how you use it and for what purpose that defines that. The negative face of power is winning at all costs, regardless of who gets hurt. And remember that when you win at someone else's expense, they almost always attempt to get even in some way. So that little brief moment you had where you felt good about winning, in the end, that ultimate cost may not be worth it. Another leadership pearl to think about when we talk about power is that sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to make obnoxious people happy. And these people who usually don't have power will never be happy. So not everyone's going to like you as a leader, accept those that do, and then just move on. Also remember when we talk about power differences, that as a leader, you absolutely have to allow others, including your followers, to feel differently than you do, even if you think that they're wrong. I think you've probably all worked with someone who complains about you or the department that they work in. They don't like management, the staffing's not good enough, and you certainly don't pay them enough. But Riley says that sometimes we want and expect others to act in a specific way, and then when they don't, we get our feelings hurt. You cannot control how others around you feel, and you're not responsible for how they feel. So stop trying. Try not to feel personally let down when those around you don't feel the same way. That's an important part of leadership, and that's also how we learn with and from each other. Now, I'll acknowledge that conflict sometimes can just feel awful. And I'm sure that we can all think of a situation or two where somebody really nasty has gotten to us and brought us down to their level, especially if they're a bully. But be very careful about trying to engage in conflict with a bully because they're going to be much better at it than you. They've had more practice. And when you compete with a bully, you're more likely than not going to lose. So if I had more time, I'd share kind of an in-depth story about a conflict that I had with a physician early in my career. And he was a true bully. And I did the worst possible thing. Not only did I try to compete with him by responding just as nastily as he was to me, I did it in front of a patient. Now, he wanted me fired. I didn't get fired, but I did learn a lot about it because in the end, being a bully back brought me down to his level and gave away some of my own personal power. So make sure you don't do it in front of patients, but also make sure that if you decide to fight a fight with someone, and particularly if it's a bully, that you're not doing it just because your ego got bruised. Leadership lesson 7. Communication is vital. For those of you who are students, you hear this over and over and over again in nursing school. But we take this for granted because having good communication skills is one of the most underrated leadership skills. And it's not just writing and speaking articulately, it's also listening. And that's especially true when we think something's obvious, even when it's not. We also have to be careful how we communicate. Some things are too important to communicate by a letter or an email because you're not giving the person you're communicating with the opportunity to validate what they've heard or to ask any questions. I also have to ping social media just a little bit. It's not a place for venting because privacy on the internet is an illusion. I'm always amazed when colleagues post something really negative about where they work or their boss or the troubles that they're experiencing at work. I don't care how private you think your post is or how limited you think people are that can see it. Once it's shared by you, the entire world has access to it. So be very careful what you post online. Also be careful what you put in emails. I don't think you've actually lived until you've accidentally hit reply all or sent a message to the wrong person. So as a leader, be really sensitive about who you're communicating with, what the message is, and how best to communicate it. Also make sure that your communication is clear, that you've identified it in multiple formats and in multiple ways, and that it's been interpreted correctly. Lesson 8, appreciate and empower your followers. Followers are such an underappreciated part of the leadership equation because good followers make leadership look easy. And remember what I talked about at the beginning, that all it takes to stop being a leader is for your followers to stop following you. Because it's not just the leader who sets the priorities for action. Effective leaders set goals with their teams. But sometimes followers can and do influence leaders in very negative ways. For example, followers can and do mislead leaders, whether intentionally or not. I think we can all think of situations where we've been misled by biased or incomplete information, whether it was intentional or not. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate between friends and enemies when you're a leader. And that old adage about holding your friends close and your enemies closer, it's true. It's also true that being a leader will likely win you some false friends as well as some true enemies. It can also be very hard as a leader sometimes to figure out who to trust. But trust is a cornerstone of the leader-follower relationship. And it's very difficult to lead if you can't trust that your followers are right there with you. And finally, the last lesson on the road to leadership, it's about setting priorities and enjoying the journey. Because when you constantly do or give to others, it can be very self-depleting. So the lesson here is really to spend your time and energy on things that are important to you. And by that, I mean all those competitors that we have for our time and energy, including career and personal life. For most of us, it means finding time to spend with friends and to have positive and healthy relationships with our families. And as strange as it may sound, sometimes leaders, when they're surrounded by people all day long, it can trigger an instinct inside them to make them want to run away. So leaders really do have to fight this natural urge and make an effort to consciously replenish themselves with the very special people in their lives. Enjoying yourself as a leader also means great vacations, hobbies, finding the time to relax. And don't forget to save a little time for exercise and staying healthy, because power and energy really do go hand in hand. And for some of you, spirituality may be an important part of staying healthy and doing what's really important in your life. So this goes back to the whole self-awareness thing. You have to be clear about what's truly important in your life. Not only do you have to identify goals and write them down, you need to put a timeline with them so that there's something that you have an endpoint and you can set goals. They're going to be much more likely to become a reality. And we all know, as time goes by, that it's probably our most precious resource. And I swear, as I get older, time's going by more quickly and more quickly. But also some of the tools that we've introduced into our lives that are supposed to be saving us time are actually at the root of how we waste time. And again, I'm going to pick on social networking. While it gives us so many new opportunities to connect with long-lost friends and people, it can be a huge time waster. Not everyone in the world needs to know what you're doing every minute of the day. Remember, too, that other people in your life will try to make their priorities your priorities. Don't let that happen. And finally, not everything worth doing needs to be done at the highest possible standard. I look back now, there are so many things in my life I did to a level of perfection. Now, was it because perfection was important or needed? No. It's because it gave me the opportunity to avoid doing something else that I really should have been doing and didn't want to do. So this final lesson is all about enjoying the journey. We really should eat more hot fudge sundaes, take more picnics, more walks in the park. And we also need to slow down enough to enjoy the journey. Don't we all feel a little bit like this dog sometimes? I think it's all about feeling like you're in control of your own priorities. Having new learning opportunities in my life and growing and learning continues to make my journey worthwhile for me. But the leadership journey that each and every one of you might decide to pursue could be very different. It is amazing, though, because what we share as leaders is the potential to make a difference in the lives of others and their journeys. In fact, I think we often discount the impact that we can have on other people's lives. It's very powerful. So I'm not saying you're not going to encounter some challenges on your road to leadership, but you really, truly probably already have all the skills that you need to take on these challenges. You just have to have the confidence that everything you want to achieve can be yours, and that if you work hard and want it badly enough, it's probably going to happen, because our background and our circumstances have influenced who we are, but we are responsible for who we become. So leadership is not the privilege of the few. You and I can be leaders, and we can make a difference. Just be confident in who you are as a leader and what you have to share with others. Take on these roles and make a difference in the lives of the people that you touch on your road to leadership. And remember the 9 lessons that I talked about today. They'll be here in your slides, which will, I think, be shared with you later. There's some additional information about me and some of my publications. And here's my contact information. And I think we have some time here for a couple questions. Let me stop sharing here.
Sorry, I muted myself. Thank you so much, Dr. Huston, for that really great presentation. That was excellent advice. So great to hear just a touch of some of the stories you have. I can tell you have even more. We could be here for hours and I
could do it for hours and tell great stories.
We do have some questions.
Okay.
And I will say too, let me just give a shout out from my marketing coordinator here that the slides will be sent out to all attendees. So if you didn't grab Dr. Huston's contact info, do not worry, that will get sent out. So if you are here, you will get that. All right, we do have a few questions from the Q&A portion. A reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A, whatever works. And the first question that we have is, how can I get over the fear of being judged by others and instead put myself out there without caring what they think?
I think that saying about fake it till you make it has some validity here. I think there are times in my life where I have known I had to step into a leadership role when I didn't always have confidence in myself, that I could do that. I do think that surrounding yourself with experts and friends who are resources and supporters. Sometimes when I'm tasked to do something that I think I've never done that before, or it seems so monumental, or I'm not quite sure how to break that down, I network with these experts. I'm famous for reaching out and saying, I need your best thinking. What would you do in this situation, or how do you suggest that I proceed? So don't be afraid to seek the advice or counsel of those who are wiser than you, who have lived it, to help share that with you. And I'm an organized person. So one of the first things I do when I get this huge task and I just feel like overwhelmed by it is I try to break it down into smaller parts. So I get counsel, I break it down into smaller parts. I take on some of the easier things that are kind of easy to do off the top because it's a confidence builder. And those are the 2 things I think that come to mind first of all.
Thank you. We have a related question actually, which is, how do you overcome imposter syndrome as a leader?
It's I think some of the same answers. Having that mentor or having a cheerleader or having somebody who's just behind you, encouraging you. And I talked about the fact that we're probably our own worst critics. We are so hard on ourselves. I don't think we realize that there isn't a leader out there in any position that isn't going to make mistakes or say something dumb or do something dumb. So part of it is just accepting the frailty of being human, not being so hard on yourself, being able to laugh at yourself. I can't tell you how many dumb things I have done on my leadership journey in very public positions and later thought, I can't believe I did that. So the imposter syndrome is taking the pressure off of yourself. And in fact, I'll share with people who might experience some of the same fear of public speaking that I had, because it was decades. Even as president of Sigma, it was such a huge thing for me to do. Part of it was recognizing that not everything had to be done to the best possible level. Sometimes it just had to be good enough. So I think for those who experience imposter syndrome, step back and say, what level does this really need to be accomplished at? Maybe I'm setting myself up for failure by having these unrealistic high expectations. Maybe it just has to be good enough. And, there would be days when I was really struggling with the public speaking and I'd come home and my husband say, how did it go? And I'd say, great. But there were other days I'd come home and I'd say, it was good enough. And he'd smile and pat me on the back. And so if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, believe in yourself more. Make sure your expectations in terms of desired outcome are appropriate to the level that really needs to be achieved. And again, seek the outside counsel, have a cheerleader in the back pushing you forward. I just never could have achieved what I have in my life without my mentor and having a cheerleader behind me, because her vision for me was so much greater than that which I had for myself.
I have a question related to that too. Thank you for that answer. So let's say I don't have a mentor yet. I know who I would like my mentor to be. How do I start that? How do I start that conversation, that role? What's that look like?
Yeah, if you look in the literature, it often talks about a mentor actually choosing a mentee, but the reality is I rarely see that. Um, I think if I was a young person or if I was a person who had a specific need, first of all, and this is what I tell anyone who approaches me about being their mentor, what is it that you want from a mentor? Because I have had different mentors for different things in my life. Like when I wanted to begin to learn how to publish, I had a different mentor than when I wanted to learn how to be a more powerful speaker, or when I needed to learn more about academia and teaching. So sometimes people will say, will you be my mentor? And I'll say, well, yeah, but what is it you want from me? And they kind of step back and say, well, I thought you were going to tell me. Well, no, it is very much a bilateral learning relationship. And I always learn something from the people that I mentor, but I need them to have some kind of an idea of what it is they want me to help them with to make sure that we're a good fit and that I'm the right person for them and that I have the skill set that they are wanting or needing. So I would say the first thing, if you think you want to find a mentor, is to figure out why. What is it you hope that they're going to help you with? That you write some very specific goals, that you really do a little bit of research about who are the most appropriate people with this skill set to help me, and to do all of that background before you actually approach someone. For me, when somebody comes to me and they say, these are the 3 things I want to work on, and I read your bio and this is your skill set, and so I think we're a great fit, that's just a much better start to that relationship.
Thank you. Speaking of different roles, did you find many of your skills transferable from practice to academia?
Yes, after that initial kind of bump. I mean, I would say leadership is leadership. And it applies in your family unit. It applies, matter what setting that you're working in. But the cultures are very, very different. The criteria you use to determine success, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve are very different. And I think for most of my life, I have traversed both roles. I have, even when I've been teaching for the most part of that, I was in clinical practice as well, just trying to make sure that we don't lose that ability to merge the expectations of academe with the expectations of clinical practice, because there is still some divide. And having walked in both worlds, I understand that. And I think we need to have more conversations about merging those so that we better understand how each of the 2 settings work, and how we can produce graduates who not only meet academic expectations, but also clinical expectations.
Thank you. Bit of a pivot now. We have a few more questions. What have you found effective in boosting staff morale and reducing burnout? Big topic, always, but especially right now.
I think one of the simplest things that you can do is to recognize and thank staff more often. Praise is a powerful motivator. Public recognition is a powerful motivator. And I see staff nurses who have stepped forward during really challenging times. Pandemic immediately jumps to mind. And they risked their lives, and they continue to work short staff sometimes under incredibly difficult conditions, whether they be emotional or physical. And we don't recognize that enough. Just helping employees know that we recognize their uniqueness, what they're contributing, how they're helping us to achieve whatever our mission, vision, values are. and public recognition is important. I mean, that's the leadership part of it. The management part of it is making sure staff have reasonable working expectations, that their patient loads are reasonable, that the unit is adequately staffed with people with the right knowledge and skill sets, and that we aren't using mandatory overtime as a way of routine staffing. I mean, there's so many things in the actual work setting that we can do to try to make sure people aren't set up for failure. So the leadership is the recognition, the thanks, I just think the recognition and the acknowledgement is so important. And the management side is actually assuring that they have reasonable workload.
That's great. Thank you. Speaking about the pandemic, since that came up, what do you think is the biggest challenge you face today as a leader in a remote world?
I guess I want to make sure I clarify the question. A remote world meaning like electronic world, or remote
That's what I
like?
think their meaning is. You know, now that so much, I'll interpret the question. Apologies, Brandy. Correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong. Brandy's the one who asked. But yeah, we've transitioned so much to digital. So what are some big challenges in trying to be a leader in the digital environment we often find ourselves in?
You know, I try really hard not to be a change laggard here, because I do think sometimes we lose something when we don't have that face-to-face connection with people. And while I'm also kind of have a personal interest in technology and think that we need to embrace technology so we don't get left behind, I think that we have to be very careful not to lose that human connection. When I can think of so many times at the end of my teaching where I'd be going down the hall trying to talk to students, and they had phones in their hands and they're yakking away, and I'd say, well, who are you talking to? Oh, each other. And I'm like, but you're right next to each other. So I again, that human connection is just really important. But there's no question, when I think about the pandemic and all the terrible burdens that it brought into people's lives, I also think that if there's an upside to it, it causes to rethink how and where work can be done. I don't think that education will ever be the same, because I think it opened up new opportunities for learning online and virtual learning. I look at a meeting like this where we have the opportunity to reach out to people all around the world and communicate with each other without having to do it face to face. So it truly is a blend. So I guess I'd like to recognize and acknowledge that both are important. The human connection when possible, but also recognizing the new learning opportunities that we have as a result of our new virtual reality.
Thank you so much for that. I think that might be all the time we have for questions. We have one or two we didn't quite get to, so we could either stay on for those, or I actually think what we'll do is you all have Dr. Huston's contact information. So if you have follow-up questions for Dr. Huston, if she's okay with it, please send those her way.
I'm great with it. I have so enjoyed this, so I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. And I'd love to talk to any of you, or if you're teaching leadership and you want some ideas, or if you use the book and you have questions about case studies or anything, I'm happy to talk with you at any point. Mm-hmm. And if I can be helpful to any of you in terms of your own leadership career, please reach out to me. I at this point in my life, one of my most important purposes, I think, is being kind of a legacy leader who can pass on and assist other people in their own leadership development.
Well, you've certainly done that today. So thank you again so much for your time and your expertise. As a reminder, if you would like that credit for the contact hour, please fill out the evaluation form. The link is on screen right now and in the chat. But we thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to Sigma for partnering with McGraw-Hill to put this on. And thank you, of course, to Dr. Huston. I will applaud. They can't hear. Nobody can really do the applause, but I will applaud for everyone. That was amazing. I learned a lot, and that was great. So thank you so much. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you again for your attendance.